What's up, guys? Today I thought I'd do a kind of a different video than the other pen videos I've done. Today I'm going to be doing kind of like a top 5 fountain pens for the past year. This, kind of also a shout out to Matt Armstrong at the Pen Habit YouTube channel. His videos are actually pretty good, and they have really relatively high production value. They're definitely a lot better and more organized than my videos, that's for sure. But recently he had put out a top 5 pens of the year from the time where he really started getting into fountain pens to up till now. And that kind of, watching that video kind of made me realize that, even though I've been using fountain pens for quite some time now, it was actually around this past year that I really got into the habit where I, was really more active on reading forums, looking into different pens and different inks. In the past when I used fountain pens, I used relatively cheap pens. My most expensive pen was a Lamy Safari, and I used like Pelican Brilliant black ink in it for years. And it was like around, I think either the end of January to around the beginning of February of 2013 that I started really getting into the fountain pen hobby. And in the past year, it's a little more than a year, right now it's in March. But in the past year, I've spent a significant amount of money on pens, inks, papers, pen accessories, etc. So I figured, it was a cool video. Made me think about my top 5 favorite pens that I've had this past year. I've definitely learned a lot about fountain pens this past year, and I've kind of settled on certain aspects of pens that I like and don't like. And I've basically, when you collect fountain pens, you kind of get into a phase where you will buy a lot of pens at first, some expensive, usually a lot of inexpensive to moderately expensive pens, before you kind of settle on what you really will determine as like your grail pens. And I feel that in the past year I've gotten to that point where I kind of know what I want in a pen, and now I'm working towards either getting a pen that fits my needs or pens that I have on my list of pens that I want to own in my small collection within my lifetime. So might as well just get started. Right off the bat, not all the pens in my top 5 are expensive. I do have some other expensive pens that I don't necessarily consider are that great, so they didn't make this list. And like Matt said in his video, basically he's going to be looking towards in the future getting pens that kind of beat out or knock out one of the pens in his top 5, and it's kind of the same for me. But first off, nice lowly inexpensive option. It's a Pilot 78G. These are actually discontinued by Pilot. They've been discontinued for many years, but they were such inexpensive and cheap pens that there's a lot of new old stock out there, and you can buy this. I know certain sellers in the US will sell it for like upwards of $20, but you get this easily from Asia for around $10. And they write really well. They come with overall they're relatively cheap. They use kind of like a cheap plastic. It's kind of a slim pen and it's very lightweight. But for me, I don't mind it that much because I do prefer pens on the lighter side of things. And they are a cartridge converter pen. I'm sure if you've been on the forums for any given period of time, if you've ever looked at any threads that give suggestions to what a beginner should get for their first pen, this has probably popped up once in a while. This pen right now is basically my Bay State Blue ink pen. People recommend when you want to use Bay State Blue because of its staining properties, and I think there was a run of Pilot feeds and Lamy feeds where they didn't really react well with each other and they would melt feeds out and stuff. I've been using Bay State Blue in this pen for months now with no problems. It's basically the only pen that I will run Bay State Blue in. Not necessarily because I'm worried about the ink damaging anything. I just don't really want to deal with having to clean out, sections or any clear demonstrator bits of other pens. And you don't really want to mix Bay State Blue with any other inks, so they can react poorly. So I use this Pilot, I like Pilot cartridges. You can see that I'm using a Pilot cartridge now. What I did was I basically punctured the cartridge, dumped out the ink, cleaned it out really well, and then right now with my bottle of Bay State Blue, it came with the eyedropper. I got the large bottle. I just used the eyedropper and I just filled the I filled a Pilot cartridge with the eyedropper. And that's one of the nice things I like about the Pilot cartridges versus other brands of cartridges, is that the Pilot cartridges have a really wide opening, so you can actually fit an eyedropper in there and fill them up, and you don't necessarily have to get an ink syringe out, fill up the cartridge, and then have to clean the ink syringe out. So it's a great option. This pen is a steel nib. It uses the same nib as other inexpensive Pilot pens like the Metropolitan, which honestly the Metropolitan is kind of a, it kind of gets honorable mention for my top 5. I had made a video about it, and in that video I said that it was a gift for a coworker, which I've given him since then, and he loves. Since then, I've also bought one for myself, which I had originally planned to grind. I think I was going to do a medium, like a fine medium cursive italic nib. Never got around to it. That pen is basically new in box still. I guess I could have made that pen a Bay State Blue pen, ink pen, but that gets runner up. Just, I can't really say it's top 5 because I haven't really been using it personally all that much, although it is a great option, and definitely I can see it bumping this out, considering the Metropolitan is still being made, and for basically $5 more than this, you get a much more substantial, seemingly higher quality pen. Next is a vintage pen. This happens to be a Rexel Pharmacy pen. I think this was made basically in the early 1900s. It's an eyedropper fill pen made out of ebonite, completely made out of hard rubber, with a 14 karat, tiny 14 karat gold nib. But this nib is very flexible. I don't know if I'll be able to show you. Let's see. Why not? I have a card deck here. A card clip, I mean, not a card deck. So you see, like, with very little pressure, the tines on this nib just flex way out. This nib is actually softer than the nib I have on my other vintage flex pen, which is a Waterman 92. They both kind of flex out to the same line width though, because that Waterman actually has like a much larger nib than this Rexel. I don't know if you can hear that. I just popped the nib down. There are some issues with the feed and the nib assembly. I haven't really gone ahead and taken this apart to kind of fix it, but it still writes perfectly fine. Nice wet flow, has no problems railroading when I when I flex with it. And the best part is, I got this for I think around like $35. So basically, I got a vintage flex pen for $35. Eyedropper filled, so I don't have to deal with having to change like rubber sacks or anything in the future. Basically, when I'm done with this pen, I open it and I flush it out with water, and it keeps it clean enough basically. Although being an eyedropper, you do have to deal with pen leaking from between the body and the section. I've yet to silicone grease this pen up, just because I feel like that would be a pain in the ass to clean out of the threads in the future. So, when I hold this pen, I actually hold it quite high above where the seam is between the section and the body, so my fingers don't really get all that inky when I use it. And it's not like it's a significant leak where it'll start dripping out ink. It only leaks to the point where if you touch it, it'll get a little bit of ink on your fingers. So yeah, very nice pen. Keep an eye out on these on eBay. You'll get them in varying conditions, and I can't necessarily say that you're gonna get one that has a flexible nib, but I managed to get lucky. Let me see if I get a close-up of the imprint. No, my lighting is not really set up for close-ups right now. My lighting is up here instead of behind. Anyway, whatever, logistics. Definitely check these out. I had gotten this pen because I kind of wanted an eyedropper made out of hard rubber, and it just so happened that the nib was quite flexible. It was a bit of a risk because this was kind of like a buy as is unrestored, and it just so happens that it worked out just fine. I mean, although honestly, with an eyedropper pen, how much can really go wrong with it? Let's just stack that so it doesn't roll all over the place. Next is my Pilot Custom 74. This was basically the second gold nib pen that I had bought. You know, unfortunately, I guess to some fans, the Lamy 2000 does not make my top 5. I really love the pen. I like it. I just don't really use it. You know, pens that made this top 5 list are pens that I used very often, you know, that I find myself using quite a bit. And, you know, the Lamy 2000 is very robust, it writes well and everything, but I just find this is a little more enjoyable to write with. You know, it's very easy to maintain. It is a cartridge converter pen, which some people may hate. Personally, I kind of like, just because it makes it cleaning it really simple. You know, you just basically flush it out. You don't have to worry about greasing up pistons or cleaning out vacuum fillers or whatever. And I really like this line of Pilot pens, and a lot of Pilot pens actually, because, you know, it's super easy to clean out. You know, like the nib and feed. Watch this, I say this, I can't do it. The nib and the feed basically just pull right out, you know, and you can easily clean. Obviously, I did not do a great job with this one, but, you know, you can easily clean it out and flush it. You know, if you wanted a really high quality pen to write with very, how we say, like, not as friendly of a fountain pen ink, you know, let's say you want to use iron gall and you're worried about maybe it clogging up the feeds and stuff, you know, then this pen would be a pretty good candidate for that, because it's so easy to take apart and it is so much easier to maintain, versus, you know, other pens which are not necessarily as easy to pull the feed and nib out. Some pens require like a knockout block and stuff. Others, like, you can't even, oops, wrong way, you can't even take them apart readily. So it makes it a little more difficult, and, you know, if your feed does end up getting clogged up by iron gall ink or whatever, you're in for a whole hassle of sending it out and having it cleaned professionally. Although I guess some people would argue that you probably shouldn't even be pulling your nibs and feed out of your normal pens anyway, but, you know, I've kind of gotten to the point of the hobby where, you know, I do a lot of the pen maintenance myself. In second place, I guess, is this pen right here. This is a Schaefer Balance in cobalt blue. This is the reissue Schaefer Balance. I guess some people call it the Schaefer Balance 2 that was issued out during the 90s. It's made out of acrylic, which I think is really gorgeous. I actually have 2 of these pens, and I have 3 more that are on my wish list. But because they're discontinued and they are quite fragile, they are getting hard to find. The other one I have is a Crimson Glow, which is, you know, you can kind of see like the contrast and the deepness of the acrylic versus, you know, it's not as noticeable with the cobalt. I do also want the Aspen. I want the Amber Glow, and I also want the Jade. My friend who sold me these 2, he kept the Jade for himself. That bastard. The Jade looks really nice. The Aspen and the Amber. The Aspen's very close to the Amber, except it has blue specks in it as well, and the Amber is just really nicely marbled. These pens are gorgeous pens. I honestly had no interest in the Schaefer Balance lines, vintage or semi-vintage, in this case semi-modern. You know, I was never really interested in these pens. I wasn't, like, I don't mind that I have them, but like, the design never really appealed to me all that much. I kind of bought these 2 from my friend for a pretty good price on a whim. I haven't done a video on these because it's just, they're not easy pens to obtain. Like, they don't come up very often, and they can get pretty expensive when they do come up. And these 90s era release have a reputation of being very fragile and cracking really easily. People have had these pens in boxes, brand new, and when they get them out, there's cracks in them. It's like, if you look at them the wrong way, they crack. So this one I've kept in relatively good condition. It's not new, you know, but I haven't really used all that much. This one, because I actually found that there was a chip out of the body here, I figured, oh well, it's already damaged, pre-loved. It basically became one of my everyday carry and beater pens, and I use this pen quite a bit. You know, it comes with a 14 karat feather touch nib. This one has a broad nib on there. and I can basically unscrew the section because it's a cartridge converter pen, and I can switch nib units between the two bodies. So it's also around the same size as the M600 for reference. These pens were not made to post, and if you do want to post, be very careful because, like I said, they have a reputation of cracking, and it will crack around the cap lip here if you post too hard. But it's, you know, it's long enough and it's weighted nicely enough. You know, it's balanced quite well that, at least for me and my size of hands, because I favor the M600 size of pens, this works out perfect. And finally, I'm sure many of you who watch my videos would have saw this coming, but my top pen of the year is my Pelican M600. I love this pen. This pen, even though it's basically, I guess, my second or third most expensive pen right now, and Pelican has recently put out another price increase, I think by like 10% or something, so the prices for Pelicans have gone up a lot. You know, back when I was in high school, you know, Pelicans, you know, M600s were probably going for like high $100 range or low 200s. Now they're inching towards $300, at least street price. But yeah, I use this pen the most out of the entire time of this past year that I've been using fountain pens, because it's a great writer. It's, you know, I've said this multiple times about this pen. You know, it's basically as close to a perfect pen as I've obtained throughout all of the pens that I've gotten. Right now I currently have, you know, one of the great things about the Pelican pens is you can swap the nib units out, and right now I have a double broad M200 steel nib on there. Screws right in. The 600 series and the 200 series, the nib size isn't all that different. The M600 nib is a little, ever so slightly longer than the 200 series nib. Obviously this is steel and the 600 series nib is gold, but honestly with Pelican steel nibs, they write quite well, and you know, they do write kind of soft, although I guess a lot of people would argue that they write kind of like nails, you know, especially if they're really into the vintage Pelican pens and vintage flexible gold nib pens in general. But for me, this writes with a nice cushion feel to it. It doesn't write as hard and as stiff as a nail does. Easy to swap out nib units. I've basically worked on 5 different nib units at this point, either doing custom grinds for friends or just tuning them to write as intended for whatever nib size they were originally at. And overall, just a great pen. And I mean, you know, I use this at work. You know, this isn't a desk pen for me by any means. This gets carried in a leather pen sleeve most of the time, or a leather pen case put into my front pocket of my pants, whether it be jeans or slacks or, you know, whatever. I use that at work. Obviously I don't throw it around, but I don't baby it, and you can see that there's lots of micro scratches on it, basically from use. And, you know, I've greased up the piston several times in the past. I guess I've had this pen for like 10 months now. And it, you know, this pen basically made me fall in love with the Pelican family as a whole. Granted, I don't really own that many Pelican pens. I do have the 650 with the vermeil cap, but it has gotten me interested in looking into getting an M800, M1000. Originally, when I first got into fountain pens, I kind of disregarded those two pens. I know they were like flagship pens and everything, but they just felt too heavy and unbalanced for me. Since then, I've changed how I hold my pens, so the back weighting problem isn't as big of an issue as it was when I used to hold my pen. You know, I used to hold my pen this way, it would be too back heavy and too uncomfortable. Now I hold my pen more this way, so the piston knob portion of the pen, where, you know, on the 800 and 1000 is heavier because of the brass piston mechanism, is not as back balanced as holding it this way, where it kind of weighs and turns the wrist a little bit. But whatever, that's a different story. So I find it's very hard for me to find a pen that will probably ever bump the M600 out. Like, you know, I think I've said many times, the only thing I wish about this pen that was different was if they had made the piston assembly threaded instead of pressure fit. You can only take this out when you take this out. Basically, it'll never fit in as tight as it originally did from factory. And I wouldn't necessarily want a brass piston assembly in here because it would change the balance of the pen. But they could thread the plastic, similar to what TWSBI does. And this is purely just for a maintenance thing. If ink or water were to ever get in the back of the piston, or let's say 20 or 30 years down the line, I want to take it apart to maintain. That's purely just for longevity of the pen. And obviously, in the future, if I really had to, I could pop the friction piston assembly out and clean it, knowing that it'll never fit in as tight as it originally did. But yeah, this is a pen that's hard to beat. It's not a cheap pen by any means, but it's definitely not one of the most expensive pens out there. This is medium range if you want to look at some of the pens that some people will buy. And I definitely think it's worth the money. And I've said before, if I could only have one fountain pen for the rest of my life, this would probably be it. And after I got the M600, I've gotten other more expensive or fancier or better, bigger brand name pens, and this is still beating them all out. And kind of like another honorary mention, I know this video is getting kind of long, but as another honorary mention, kind of like in the same lines as the M600, is this. Visconti Homo sapiens steel age in the midi size. I wrote with this pen for 20 seconds and I knew I wanted to get one. I didn't necessarily write with this one. I wrote with the full size Bronze Age with the piston filler, but I just loved how this material feels. A video of this will be coming eventually. I've had some ups and downs with this pen, and I'm kind of in between how I feel about this pen. Like, I love it, at the same time I love how it feels. I love the size of it. It's very similar in size to the M600. It's just there are certain things about it that just kind of irk me a little bit, and it like that's kind of the reason why it hasn't made top 5. All of these pens I've basically had to tune the nibs myself. None of the pens that I've gotten here have came perfect, and I've had more problems than not with the nib on this pen. If you actually look, and I'll go into more details in the video, the nib I have on here right now is not the stock nib. I actually took the palladium nib off this pen and put a steel nib on here, for good reason, which I will go into in more detail when I do the video for this pen. Because it's such an expensive pen, I don't want to just throw up like an impressions video. I kind of did the M600 a little injustice when I threw up that video so quickly, because I didn't really have as much use time on this pen, versus as much as I'm giving this pen before I do a video. But I don't know. This pen is, I have mixed thoughts on it. I've thought about selling it to fund other girl pens, but I love the material so much, I'm just gonna keep it in my collection, and I will occasionally use, I guess. But anyway, yeah, this video is going on too long as it is. More details about the Homo sapiens, when I put the video out. I know people have asked me about it because I have made reference to the Visconti ink pot. Obviously I got the Visconti ink pot and the 2-pen case with this because I got the 25th anniversary version of this pen. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Like I said earlier in the very beginning, definitely go check out the Pen Habit YouTube channel. Matt puts out really amazing videos. He's much more organized than I am. Production value is much better. And yeah, and thanks to Matt for inspiring me to do this top 5 video. I don't necessarily think I'm gonna do this every year. It won't be a regular thing. Kind of like in the same train of thought as him. If I do find a pen that knocks one of these other pens out of my top 5 and replaces them, then maybe I'll do like an update video or whatever. So hope you guys enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.